You will not believe what the Egyptian priests used to do. Not only did they shave their heads, not only did they strip the hair from their arms and legs, but they even removed the smallest, finest strands from places you would hardly notice. Eyebrows, eyelashes, anywhere hair might cling. Smooth as polished stone, silent as the river at night. They wanted no trace of mortal untidiness left clinging to their skin. And you, if you were living then, would have been reminded again and again that stepping into the temple of the gods was no ordinary act. It was not like strolling into the local market to bargain for figs. It was stepping into eternity. And to enter eternity, you had better be spotless. But before we begin tonight's story, if you enjoy these calm history stories, please like the video and subscribe. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your comments means a lot to us. They help us to keep the work on. Your kind words are the biggest support we can get. Now, dim the lights and let us go back in time. Together. You walk along the Nile. The evening air is warm, a little sticky on your arms, and the papyrus reeds bend gently in the water. You are not a priest, not yet, but you are watching them. The temple doors are closing. Inside, the light of torches flickers on stone walls. The scent of incense drifts outward, sweet and smoky, mixing with the river's damp breath. And you notice something peculiar. The men who walk in those doors all share the same strange look. Smooth skulls shining in the firelight. No beards, no whiskers, not even the gentle shade of a shadow along the jaw. They do not look like ordinary villagers. They look like statues come alive, polished marble figures, made less of flesh and more of perfection. It is almost eerie, and yet there is power in it. You sense they want you to see them this way, hairless, spotless, set apart from the rest of the sweating, hairy mortals who plow and weave and sleep under their roofs of mud brick. Here, in the realm of the gods, no human flaw must remain. And here comes the cheeky thought. Imagine you are standing at the temple gate, about to be called inside, and the priest leans in, squinting at your face. One stray eyebrow hair, just one, and you would be marched right back out again. You probably would not survive the initiation. Your razor skills would fail you at once. The Egyptians did not invent shaving, but they perfected it for holiness. Priests were not allowed to serve in the temple unless they were hairless. Herodotus, the Greek traveler centuries later, would write with a kind of amazed respect that Egyptian priests shaved their entire bodies every other day. Every other day. A routine stricter than most modern skincare habits. And they did not do it for beauty, though perhaps some found it attractive. They did it because hair was seen as dirt, a nest for lice, a symbol of the wildness of the animal world. To stand before the god, you must be unlike the animals. You must be more refined, closer to the sun itself, shining and bare. The mainstream historians agree on this. Shaving was a ritual of purity. But there are debates too. Some scholars think it was not just about physical cleanliness, but about marking priests as a special class of people. You see, hair is also an identity. Lose your beard, and you lose the badge of adulthood, lose your brows, and your face suddenly looks strange, a little unsettling. Perhaps that was the point, to make priests appear as though they had stepped half out of the human world. And as you watch them pass, their gleaming scalps lit with torchlight, you realize that the temple itself is alive with symbols. The walls whisper prayers carved in hieroglyphs. The statues stare with inlaid eyes. And the priests, smooth as river stones, are symbols too. Moving, breathing reminders that here nothing dirty, nothing mortal must remain. Even the night birds seem to hush their calls when the temple doors shut tight. The river keeps flowing, softly hissing at the edges, and the reeds bend their heads as if they too are bowing to the strangeness of it all. Of course, you might be tempted to laugh at the thought. A life of endless shaving? The priests must have looked like they were forever late for a swim meet, and yet, behind the smoothness lay devotion. Hours of scraping skin, the occasional nick of the razor, the sting of oils poured after. Every ritual act began with this discipline, because how could you pour wine for a god if a rogue eyebrow was still clinging to your face? The Egyptians believed their temples were the very homes of the gods. The statue of Amun or Horus or Isis was not just a symbol. It was the god, embodied. And if you were serving the god in person, would you dare show up with hairy legs? The thought is both absurd and revealing. Priestly shaving was not vanity. It was reverence made visible. And so the scene becomes clearer in your mind. The Nile darkens with twilight. The stars bloom above. Inside the temple, torches hiss as they burn. And the priests, smooth as polished alabaster, move silently like shadows without edges. You watch them disappear behind the massive doors, leaving the ordinary world outside. The world of hair, sweat, and tangled mortal imperfections. Tomorrow, they will shave again, and again the day after. The rhythm of blades upon skin as endless as the river itself. A ritual of patience, a ritual of purity, and perhaps a ritual of power. The story flows forward, because now that you understand why they began to strip their bodies bare, you will want to see how the temple itself demanded even more. The water baths, the oils, the endless polishing of flesh until the skin itself seemed to gleam like gold. You have seen the priests at the gate, gleaming and silent, like moving statues. But their smoothness is not simply a matter of shaving. It is only the first layer, the first doorway into a discipline that stretches across their entire lives. Step further inside the temple with me. The air grows heavier with incense. A hush settles, broken only by the faint splashing of water in hidden chambers where stone basins wait. The sound is steady, like rain on a pond. It is here that priests begin every single day, long before the common folk stir. Imagine yourself in that moment. The stars are still out. The desert air carries a sharp coolness. And yet, already, priests are rising from their reed mats, walking barefoot into the temple courtyards. They lower themselves into pools of cold water, bathing 4 times a day, sometimes more. Not one splash is for refreshment. Each plunge is a cleansing act. The Egyptians believed water was a purifier, a divine substance flowing straight from creation. The priests called it the water of life. By submerging their bodies again and again, they were not only washing away dust, they were rinsing away the invisible stains of mortality. And as their skin emerges from the pool, smooth and hairless, the shine of the water only doubles the effect. Now the shaving is repeated. Bronze razors scrape over arms and chests. Flint blades nip away tiny strands that dared to grow overnight. And the priests are not shy about oils either. Jars of perfumed unguents are opened. Lotus flower, cedar resin, sometimes the rich scent of frankincense. The skin is rubbed until it glows, as if the body itself is being polished into an offering. It may sound luxurious, but it is not about comfort. It is about sacrifice. The priests were not living for themselves. They were living for the gods. To present yourself before Amun or before Isis meant you had to erase yourself a little. Your hair, your sweat, your natural odor, all erased, until what remained was a neutral vessel. Not a man, not a woman, just a body of service. Here lies the mainstream fact. Egyptian temples were thought to be the actual houses of the gods. The daily rituals performed by priests were not metaphors. They were literal acts of feeding, clothing, and entertaining the divine statues. The god Amun statue, for example, was washed, anointed with oils, dressed in fine linen, and offered meals of bread, meat, and beer. How could you touch a god's garment if your own skin still bore the stubble of sleep? And yet, here is the curious side note. All of this smoothness also had a practical effect. Egypt was hot. Egypt was dusty. Lice were a constant menace. To shave everything meant to live free of crawling discomfort. So while priests claimed they were honoring the gods, they were also, perhaps without admitting it, making their lives just a little less itchy. Who knew holiness could double as pest control? Still, historians remain divided here. Some argue that the endless washing and shaving was purely symbolic, rituals meant to separate priests from ordinary people. Others insist there must have been a hygiene motivation too. Was it really only about gods? Or was it also about surviving in a climate where sweat and sand made perfect breeding grounds for parasites? The debate lingers, like incense smoke that never quite clears from the temple halls. Let your eyes wander further through the sanctuary. The walls are painted with gods who themselves appear flawless, shining with smooth skin, no body hair in sight. Even the great pharaohs are painted in this ideal form. So the priests, in their daily shaves and baths, are copying the eternal images that surround them. To look smooth is to look divine. And there is another layer. After the baths, after the razors, after the oils, the priests must also change their garments. Only linen may touch their skin, never wool. Wool was seen as unclean, a reminder of the animal world. So the linen clings lightly to oiled flesh, cool in the morning air, a second skin that whispers rather than weighs. Now picture it. A line of priests, fresh from their ablutions, their scalps gleaming like small moons, their skin fragrant with lotus and myrrh. They step barefoot into the temple's innermost chamber. Torches flicker. The statue of the god waits, and as the priests raise their arms to lift linen garments or pour wine, you see not a hint of hair, not a shadow of sweat. It is almost unnatural, and perhaps that was exactly the point. But you cannot help smiling at the thought. What if one priest had been lazy that morning? What if he had missed a patch behind his knee? Would the god notice? Would the others whisper? You can almost imagine a sleepy priest muttering excuses, caught out with a straight tuft, while the rest roll their smooth eyes. Even in holy discipline, there is always a trace of human comedy. Still, the temple rhythm continues. Bath after bath, shave after shave, oil after oil, day after day. To live as a priest was to live in a loop of cleansing, and the smoothness, sacred though it was, never ended. You wonder how the skin endured it. All those blades, all those scrubbings. But to them, pain was just another offering. And as you drift further inside this story, the image of those bronze blades begins to gleam brighter in your mind. How did they cut so cleanly? How sharp were those ancient razors for priests to rely on them every other day? The answer lies waiting in the next chamber among the tools of their trade. You have followed the priests through water and oil, watched them polish their bodies like living statues. Now your eyes catch on something sharper, something smaller, resting quietly on temple shelves or tucked inside little chests. Razors. Not the buzzing, humming devices of the modern world. No plastic handles, no cans of foam. Here, the blades are bronze, sometimes even gleaming with the soft shimmer of gold. They are shaped like crescents or like flattened knives, handles carved from wood or bone, sometimes wrapped in strips of linen for a steadier grip. Picture the ritual again. A priest sits, his body already rinsed in cold water. Another priest approaches with a razor, its edge sharpened against a whetstone. The scrape begins. Slow, careful strokes. You can almost hear the faint rasp of metal against skin. Each pass removes not only hair, but a layer of ordinary humanity. The Egyptians had been shaving since the Old Kingdom, long before temples reached their greatest splendor. Early razors were made of flint, stone sharpened to an edge. Imagine the sting of that, rough against the skin, prone to nicks, but effective enough. Later came copper, and then bronze, for Egypt was among the first lands to master the mixing of metals. And eventually, gold razors appeared, likely reserved for nobles and for ceremonies. Did anyone truly shave with gold? Historians remain divided here. Some suggest they were symbolic, placed in tombs as eternal offerings, too soft to cut hair efficiently. Others whisper that perhaps, on festival days, the richest priests did let the gilded edge glide across their heads. You run your finger along the imagined blade. It feels cool, but also heavy with meaning. For the razor is not only a tool, it is a divider. With one scrape, it separates priest from commoner, sacred duty from earthly life. Each stroke is like a miniature ritual. Now, here is a curious side note. Ancient Egyptians believed hair was not only impure, it could also be magical. A lock of hair, a tuft fallen to the floor, could be used in spells. Witches might gather it, burn it, or tie it into knots. So when priests shaved, They had to be cautious about what happened to the clippings. Hair was not casually swept away. It was often collected, buried, or burned to prevent any mischievous sorcerer from twisting it into curses. Imagine the strangeness of guarding your eyebrows, not because you want to keep them, but because losing them carelessly might invite a spell. And yet, in the middle of all this seriousness, you cannot help but laugh. Think of the awkward positions. How does one priest shave another's back? Does he sigh, roll his eyes, and mutter about the endless surface area of his colleague? Perhaps they joked quietly among themselves, even as they scraped away. Even priests, you suspect, were not immune to the humor of trying to polish one another smooth like furniture. But behind the laughter, the danger was real. A sharp edge against bare skin every other day. There had to be cuts. There had to be blood. And the Egyptians, wise in medicine, used honey, resins, and even moldy bread to soothe wounds and fight infection. They were among the first to understand that honey could prevent decay, its sweetness doubling as a healing balm. So a priest, nicked during his shaving, might leave the chamber smelling faintly of flowers and honey, a walking pastry of holiness. The razor is also political. Think of the pharaoh, the living god on earth. He too appears in carvings with a smooth face, sometimes wearing the false beard of kingship, a braided strap tied behind the ears. The irony is sharp. The most powerful man in Egypt, shaven smooth, then attaching a symbolic beard to remind the world of his authority. It is as if hair is denied and honored at the same time, a paradox carved in stone. And you feel how the blade glints differently in every context. Sometimes bronze, sometimes gold, sometimes practical, sometimes ceremonial, but always close to the skin, always whispering its rasping hymn. Now imagine the temple storage room. On shelves lie rows of razors, some plain, some ornate. Their edges are polished, oiled to prevent corrosion. Beside them rest pumice stones for rubbing away stubble and tiny tweezers for precision. It is a priestly barber shop, but one wrapped in incense and chant, not gossip and idle chatter. Every tool has sacred weight, and yet, as you linger here, you realize how human the act remains. No matter how divine the purpose, a razor is still a razor. It must still be held steady, angled correctly, drawn carefully across the curve of a chin or the round of a skull. Perhaps in the stillness of the temple, the priests found comfort in this simple, repeated act. Scrape, rinse, scrape again. The rhythm of razors is as steady as the lapping of the Nile. But the blade alone does not complete the transformation. For shaving was not just about removing what grows naturally. It was about erasing even the smallest, most delicate markers of the human face. And that is why, as you watch, you see one priest lower the razor toward his brow, toward those fragile hairs above the eye. Even eyebrows, even eyelashes must disappear. And this leads you into the strangest, perhaps most unsettling part of their discipline. For a hairless head is one thing, but a hairless face, stripped of brows and lashes, changes everything. It turns a man into something else entirely. The next chamber waits, and in it, you will see the faces of priests whose eyes stare out bare and strange, as if the gods themselves had sculpted them too smooth. You have seen the razor glide along the scalp. You have seen the smooth heads gleam like river stones. But now, the blade lingers on the most fragile terrain of all, the face itself. Here is where the strangeness deepens. Imagine the priest leaning close to a polished bronze mirror. The surface is not perfect glass, but a disc of shining metal catching just enough reflection to guide his hand. He raises the razor, steady, almost reverent, and with slow care, he scrapes away his eyebrows. Yes, even the eyebrows, even the eyelashes. Not a single tuft is allowed to remain. The result is uncanny. The face is suddenly altered. It looks bare, exposed, almost otherworldly. The soft shadow that usually frames the eyes is gone, and the lids look wide, as though forever startled or forever young. You lean closer, imagining it, a face without brows, a face without lashes. It seems incomplete, like a statue still waiting for its final chiseling. And yet for the priests, this was the perfected form, the face purified. Mainstream historians agree on one clear point. The priests shaved their brows and lashes to remove every trace of hair, for hair was a potential seat of dirt, lice, and impurity. If the gods were to look upon you, you had to offer them a face clean of any small creatures, clean of any shadow of the animal world. But here comes the curious side note. Ordinary Egyptians also shaved their brows, sometimes in grief. If a beloved cat in the household died, the family might shave their eyebrows as a sign of mourning. Not their heads, not their beards, just the brows. A strange, tender custom, as though removing the little frame above the eyes was the most intimate gesture of sorrow. So when you see a priest bare-browed, you might wonder, is he only clean, or is he also forever in a posture of grief? Historians remain divided on the effect this had. Did the gods truly demand such extreme hairlessness? Or did the priesthood amplify the rules to keep themselves set apart from everyone else? Without brows or lashes, the priests looked visibly different from ordinary villagers. They could not blend into the crowd. Everywhere they walked, their faces declared, "I am not like you. I belong to the temple." And imagine the whispers, children pointing, women nudging one another at the market. The hairless priests pass by, their faces gleaming and strange. Some villagers might see holiness. Others might see uncanny oddness, as though the priests were masks of men, not men themselves. Now picture the daily rituals with this new face. A priest leans toward the sacred statue, his smooth eyelids lowered in prayer. Without lashes to shadow his gaze, his eyes reflect torchlight directly, almost glowing. He seems half human, half sculpture. The absence of hair makes his stare unsettling, but also mesmerizing. Perhaps that is what the gods were thought to prefer. Faces stripped down like the clean lines of carved hieroglyphs. You cannot help but let one small joke slip through. Imagine if one priest forgot to shave his lashes, and as he blinked, they fluttered in the torchlight, drawing amused glances from his colleagues. "Nice try, brother," they might mutter. You nearly fooled the god with those rebellious little fans. Even the most sacred routines must have had their awkward mornings. But the discipline held. Day after day, razors skimmed brows, tweezers plucked stubborn hairs, pumice rubbed away the faintest fuzz. The face was polished into unnatural stillness. Here is something else worth imagining. When you lose your brows, sweat has no barrier. The desert sun presses hard, and salt trickles straight down into the eyes. The sting must have been constant, the blinking relentless. Did the priests bear it patiently, accepting it as another sacrifice to holiness? Or did they secretly dab at their foreheads, grumbling under their breath, while pretending to be serene? The sources are silent, and so the debate continues. Yet when you look at Egyptian art, something fascinating emerges. Statues of pharaohs and gods often show smooth, idealized faces. Brows are only hinted at with faint lines, lashes never shown. The priests, in shaving themselves this way, were becoming living mirrors of the images on the walls. Their faces were not their own anymore. They were copies of divine perfection. The ritual was thorough, but also dangerous. The skin around the eyes is delicate. A slip of the blade there could blind. So perhaps some priests chose tweezers instead, pinching each hair one by one. Painful, yes, but safer. Imagine the quiet of that chamber. Only the plink of hair into a small jar, the wince, the faint rustle of linen as a priest shifts his weight. Holiness was not without its sting. And yet, as unsettling as the smooth faces appear to you, there is a kind of beauty too. The absence of brows and lashes gives the face a timeless quality, like an untouched stone. Perhaps that was the point, to step outside time, to look less like a man of one generation and more like an eternal servant. Still, you cannot help but imagine, in a softer moment, the priests laughing among themselves, trading quips about whose eyes now looked the widest, the strangest, the most owl-like. Even holiness leaves space for humor. But the story moves on. For the temple smoothness was not only about faces. It carried into wigs, perfumes, and the grand performance of priestly life. For though they shaved away every hair, they also placed hair back upon themselves. But this time, in carefully crafted, scented, and elaborate wigs. You have seen the brows vanish, the lashes plucked away, the skin rubbed smooth with oils and razors. And yet, just as you begin to accept the priestly world of hairlessness, a contradiction rises before you. For when the priests stepped out of their baths, when their scalps shone bare under the sun, they often covered their heads again, not with their own hair, but with wigs. Imagine the strangeness. A man who has shaved every strand from his body, even from the delicate rims of his eyes, then settles a heavy wig upon his head. The wig is not careless or rough. It is carefully crafted from human hair, sometimes mixed with palm fibers or wool, sometimes perfumed with sweet oils. The strands are braided, curled, arranged in neat rows that frame the face. A face, remember, that no longer has lashes or brows. So the wig is not simply hair. It is decoration, a crown of arranged perfection. Here lies a mainstream historical fact. Wigs were worn by nearly everyone of status in Egypt. Men and women both used them, especially on festival days. The heat of the land made natural hair itchy and lice-ridden. So shaving the scalp clean and wearing a wig was the most practical solution. The priests, however, took the practice to its extreme. They shaved for holiness and wore wigs only when appearances required it. But here comes the curious side note. Wigs were not merely practical or decorative. They could be symbolic, marking status, rank, and even mood. Some wigs were enormous, with layers of curls that spilled over the shoulders. Others were simple caps of straight strands. There were even ceremonial wigs, soaked in oils until they shone, carrying perfumes that clung for hours. The wig itself became a kind of aura, a halo of fragrance and odor resting on the shaven head. And so the paradox deepens. Priests shaved to erase themselves, but they replaced the missing hair with wigs that amplified their presence. Perhaps the gods required them bare, but the people needed to see them crowned. It was a balance between invisibility to the divine and visibility to the human. Yet historians remain divided. Were wigs for priests purely ceremonial, or did they wear them daily? Some argue that priests, bound by endless cycles of bathing and shaving, probably avoided wigs, except on festivals. Others suggest that wigs were a constant necessity, a way to present themselves in public without appearing too strange to ordinary eyes. The truth likely shifted with time, with place, and with the whims of the priesthood itself. Now imagine the sensory detail. The temple smells of frankincense and lotus oil. The priests emerge smooth as polished stone. One adjusts a black wig, the braids swinging as he walks. Another carries a jar of perfume, sprinkling drops onto his wig until the air around him glows with fragrance. Even their absence of hair becomes a platform for adornment. And here, a small smile creeps across your lips. Think of the wig after hours in the sun, sweat trickling beneath it, the heavy scent of oil thick in the air. Perhaps one priest sighs quietly, slipping his wig off as soon as the ritual ends, relieved to feel the cool night breeze on his bare scalp. Holiness, it seems, came with a fair share of itchy inconveniences. But the wigs were not the only adornment. Perfumes were everywhere. Lotus blossoms floating in oil, cinnamon, myrrh, cedar. Priests anointed their skin until they glowed, their scent traveling ahead of them like an invisible herald. In the heat of Egypt, where sweat was constant, these perfumes masked what could not be avoided. To smell divine was as important as to look divine. And yet, even in this, you see the contradiction. A priest erased his natural human presence only to build a new artificial one on top of it. A polished skull hidden beneath a wig. The scent of sweat disguised by oils. It is as if the priest lived between two selves, never fully one, never fully the other. Now consider daily life beyond the temple. A priest shopping in the market, bareheaded, might draw stares. With wig on, he looked like any other elite man. But with scalp bare and brows gone, he looked uncanny, neither ordinary nor fully divine. Children may have tugged at their mother's sleeves, whispering, "Why does his face look like that?" And the mothers might hush them quickly, reminding them that this strangeness was the price of serving the gods. In the middle of this discipline, you sense both devotion and irony. The priests were models of perfection, yet they still relied on human tools. Razors, wigs, perfumes. A small arsenal of cosmetics and artifices. Holiness was not only ritual, it was maintenance. You could say priests were the ultimate perfectionists, the first true keepers of a daily grooming routine. And you cannot help but chuckle, imagining one priest bragging to another about the new imported cedar oil that made his wig shine brighter than anyone else's. But beneath the humor lies the heart of the paradox. Priests shaved themselves to be closer to gods, yet dressed themselves to be visible to men. Between smoothness and wigs, between absence and adornment, they balanced two worlds. And as the evening stretches on, you watch them retreat into the temple again. The wigs are set aside, the perfumes linger in the air. Only the smoothness remains. It is a reminder that holiness in Egypt was not simply a matter of belief. It was a daily practice, a daily reshaping of the body to stand balanced between earth and sky. The paradox will grow sharper still. For shaving was not just a private ritual, not just a matter of wigs and oils. It became political, a symbol of power itself. When a man was hairless, he was not just clean, he was closer to authority. And that, as you will soon see, changed everything. The priests have stepped back into the temple. The wigs are gone, their scalps gleam bare in the torchlight. Perfumes drift like invisible veils. But now you begin to sense something deeper. The hairlessness is not only ritual, it is a statement, a claim of power, a mark of closeness to the throne itself. For in Egypt, religion and politics were never separate. The pharaoh was not merely a king. He was a living god, the son of Ra, the embodiment of Horus on earth. His priests were not merely servants. They were his partners in rule, his voice in the temple, his instruments of divine will. Look again at the shaven scalp. It is more than a sign of cleanliness. It is a uniform. When you saw a man without a strand of hair, you knew instantly, this is one of the chosen. This is one who stands close to the god, close to the king. Mainstream historians remind us that priestly life was deeply political. Temples were not just holy places. They were economic giants. They owned land, collected grain, employed workers. And the priests who ruled these temples held immense influence. So every act of smoothness was also a declaration of authority. I am pure. I am worthy. I am part of the order that sustains Egypt. But here is the curious side note. Hair itself was linked to chaos. Wild, untamed, like the desert storms that blew from the west. Foreigners often appeared in Egyptian art with shaggy beards and unruly locks. They represented disorder, barbarism, the opposite of Mahat. The Egyptian principle of balance and truth. So when priests shaved, they were not only removing dirt, they were stripping themselves of chaos, casting away the desert winds, the wildness of the outside world. In their smoothness, they became symbols of Mahat itself. And yet, historians remain divided. Some argue that priests exaggerated their hairlessness precisely to contrast with outsiders, to declare themselves the guardians of Egyptian identity. Others suggest that the practice was so extreme it went beyond symbolism, becoming almost obsessive. Was it politics? Was it genuine belief? Or was it both at once, woven so tightly that even the priests could no longer tell the difference? Imagine now a festival day. The pharaoh appears in public, crowned with the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. His face gleams smooth, his chin decorated with the false beard of kingship, braided and stiff, strapped behind his ears. Behind him walk the priests, their bodies oiled, their heads shining. The crowd watches in awe. Here is order. Here is power. Here is Egypt. And yet you cannot help but chuckle at the contradiction. The pharaoh, shaven like a priest, wears a fake beard to show he is king. It is like putting on a costume piece for the sake of tradition. Imagine the moment at dawn when an attendant ties the little strap behind his head. The living god of Egypt, squirming slightly as the string digs at his ears. Even divinity, it seems, requires a bit of adjustment. The shaving itself was political in another way. To maintain it required time, tools, servants, and discipline. A poor farmer in the field could not shave his entire body every 2 days. But a priest could. The smoothness became a class marker, a visible line between the powerful few and the hairy many. It told everyone at a glance who had access to sacred pools, who had bronze razors and perfumed oils, who had the luxury of endless cleansing. And the symbolism extended beyond the temple. In legal and political scenes, priests often served as scribes, judges, advisors. Their smooth bodies reminded others that they were not only men. They were representatives of something higher, uncluttered by mortal wildness. To argue with a priest was to argue with a vessel polished for the gods. Still, there is another side. All this shaving, all this power was fragile. A cut could fester. A day of neglect could betray you. If a priest allowed his hair to grow, even a shadow, his authority might be questioned. Imagine the panic of one who overslept, missed the morning razor, and appeared with a faint stubble. Would whispers begin in the corridors? Would rivals seize the chance to suggest he was unfit for service? Power, it seems, demanded not only sharpness of mind, but sharpness of blade. Now pause for a moment and picture the political weight of smoothness. In the market, in the courts, in the temple, a hairless priest announced stability. He was the opposite of the shaggy barbarian. He was order embodied. He was the razor's edge, separating Egypt from chaos. And yet, there is humor even here. You imagine a group of priests arguing in the temple courtyard, their smooth scalps gleaming in the sun, their brows gone. They look like a row of polished gods having a very serious debate about divine order. Even the gods might have smiled. But as you stand watching, you sense how fragile it all was. For beyond Egypt's borders, other peoples carried their beards proudly, their hair flowing in the wind. The contrast was stark. Egypt's priests shaved everything. Foreigners did not. And in that contrast, a new layer of meaning emerged, one that carried both ridicule and pride. The story must drift there now, to the moment when the hairless priests of Egypt looked out at the shaggy beards of foreigners, and perhaps allowed themselves a quiet smile. The Nile breeze cools the evening, and you drift a little further down the river of time. The priests stand polished in their smoothness, their scalps gleaming, their eyebrows erased, their very bodies oiled to a sheen. And then, one day, through the city gates, march foreigners. And suddenly, hair, thick, flowing, tangled, unapologetic, comes pouring into view. To the Egyptians, it must have been a sight both alarming and fascinating. Imagine Nubian envoys arriving from the south, their hair coiled and textured, their beards trimmed but proud. Imagine Libyan chiefs from the west, with long braids decorated in feathers, or Syrians from the north, their beards curling down their chests. Even Greeks, centuries later, strode in with glossy locks and swaggering mustaches. Mainstream historians tell us that Egyptian art captured this contrast deliberately. On temple walls, foreigners are often shown with abundant hair, while Egyptians remain shaven and composed. It was a visual shorthand. Smoothness equaled civilization. Hair equaled chaos. It was as though every lock of hair was a reminder of the untamed desert beyond the fertile Nile. But here is the curious side note. Egyptians did not always scorn foreign hairstyles. Some nobles secretly admired them. There is evidence of Egyptians wearing wigs styled after foreign fashion, borrowing curls from Nubia, braids from Libya, even the occasional beard style. It is as if the priests shaved themselves into symbols of order, while nobles sometimes peeked at the wildness next door and thought, maybe just a little lock would not hurt. Still, for the priests, hairlessness remained non-negotiable. To keep even a whisker was to risk impurity. And so when foreigners appeared before the temple, the contrast must have been staggering. Picture the high priest standing at the temple door, smooth as polished limestone. Before him stands a bearded envoy, dust in his hair, wind in his beard. One man looks like an oiled statue, the other like a storm. Both claim dignity, but in Egypt's eyes, only one reflects Maat, the harmony of the gods. And here lies the debate among historians. Did Egyptians truly believe hair itself was impure? Or was it more about drawing lines of identity? Was it hygiene, ritual, politics, or simply, we are us and they are them? The walls of Karnak and Luxor whisper no clear answer. They only show smooth priests and hairy foreigners, each frozen forever in contrast. There is humor here too. Imagine the bewilderment of a Greek merchant arriving in Memphis. He strokes his beard proudly, thinking it makes him look wise, like a philosopher. Then he sees a procession of priests, so smooth they look like marble statues come alive. Perhaps he wonders if they are ill. Perhaps he whispers, by Zeus, do they not grow hair at all? The cultural clash must have been as comical as it was symbolic. And yet, there was practicality in the difference. In Mediterranean climates, a beard could be a badge of wisdom, a shield against sun and wind. In Egypt's heat, smoothness was easier, cooler, safer. Each culture grew from its own soil. Each found dignity in its own style. But Egyptians clung to their razor's edge identity. Hair meant otherness. Smoothness meant home. When soldiers marched to war, their enemies often appeared hairy and wild. When artists carved prisoners of battle, they gave them unruly locks, reminding the viewer, these are not us. We are ordered. They are untamed. It was propaganda through hairstyle, a politics of the scalp. Still, in private moments, the lines blurred. Some Egyptians experimented with little goatees or decorated wigs. You imagine a priest looking wistfully at a foreign braid, then sighing, knowing his razor waits at dawn. And in this tension between admiration and rejection, between smoothness and wildness, the Egyptian identity sharpened. For every foreign beard only made the shaven priest look more distinctly Egyptian. It is almost like nature itself played along. Think of the ibis with its sleek bare head. Think of the cat, smooth and groomed, curling in temple courtyards, against the bristling mane of a lion or the rough coat of a desert wolf. The Egyptians found their reflection in the polished stillness of river creatures, in the quiet gleam of moonlight on water. And so, the hairless priests stood firm, even as the centuries rolled by, and even as new peoples came and went. Their smoothness was their armor, their border, their truth. But there is one more layer still. For all their effort to strip themselves of hair, they turned around and invented hair again, in wigs, in fake beards, in ornaments. Why erase hair from the body only to craft it back in ornament? The answer lies in performance. And so, the story drifts now toward the artificial. The wigs and false beards that completed the paradox. The moon hangs low over the Nile tonight, its reflection gliding along the water, smooth as the shaven scalp of a priest. But as you follow the ripples, you notice something curious. Though the priests shaved every hair from their bodies, they did not abandon hair altogether. No, instead, they reinvented it. They shaved it away, and then carefully built it back again, in wigs and in false beards. It is a paradox, a puzzle wrapped in glossy curls. Imagine the scene. A priest emerges from the bathhouse, freshly shaven from crown to toe, gleaming with scented oils. He steps into the temple treasury, where rows of wigs rest like sleeping animals. Some are simple, straight locks that fall like reeds. Others are elaborate, coiled in ringlets, braided in layers, decorated with beads and ribbons. Each wig is carefully crafted from human hair, or sometimes from palm fiber, or even sheep's wool dyed black. The priest selects one, settles it on his bare scalp, and suddenly he is transformed, no longer hairless, but crowned with order. Mainstream historians point out that wigs were practical in Egypt. They shielded the head from the blazing sun. They kept lice at bay, since the real scalp could be shaved clean, while the wig could be fumigated or replaced. In a land where the air was hot, the Nile damp, and the dust endless, a wig was both armor and ornament. So the paradox begins to soften. Shave for cleanliness, wear wigs for dignity. It makes a sleepy kind of sense. But here comes the curious side note. Even women wore wigs to temple festivals, sometimes over their own shaved scalps. There are records of priests' daughters shaving bald to be ritually pure, and then adorning themselves with wigs so large they nearly tipped forward. The wigs were not just decoration, They were costumes of identity. To be Egyptian, to be seen, was to be crowned with hair you had first erased. And then there were the false beards. Now this is where the story tilts into strangeness. Egyptian priests themselves rarely wore them, but the gods and the pharaohs, yes, they demanded it. On temple statues you can see them, long braided beards jutting stiffly forward, carved in stone, wrapped in metal. Even queens, like Hatshepsut, wore false beards in ceremonies, claiming the full dignity of kingship. To wear the beard was to wear the voice of Osiris, the lord of the underworld. It was a mask of power. A priest might be smooth in the flesh, but the god he served was always presented with a beard. Historians remain divided on the meaning. Was the false beard a sacred link, connecting mortal rulers to divine ancestors? Was it simply a badge of office, like a crown or a scepter? Or was it, in some sly way, a concession to the hairy foreigners they mocked? A quiet admission that hair did, in fact, carry gravitas? The debate lingers. The stone statues stay silent. You cannot help but laugh softly here. Imagine the scene of preparation. A high official, freshly shaven, sitting on a stool. An attendant ties a false beard with delicate straps behind his ears. The beard sticks forward stiffly, like a miniature boat prow. He tries to speak seriously, but you know he must have wondered. Does this thing make me look dignified or ridiculous? Perhaps both. Perhaps that was the point. And so the paradox deepens. Priests and nobles strove to erase the wildness of hair, yet they spent fortunes to replace it with wigs and ornaments. It was not hypocrisy. It was theater. They were building themselves into symbols. Smooth flesh declared, I am clean. The wig declared, I am adorned. The beard declared, I am divine. Think of the temple walls, carved with endless processions. There, every wig is perfect, every beard sculpted. The artists did not bother with bald patches, split ends, or crooked braids. In art, the wigs were always ideal. They were less about fashion and more about eternity. For in eternity, hair does not fall out. In eternity, the wig always sits straight. This brings you to a gentle realization. Perhaps the Egyptians were not so different from us. We too shave and then paint our faces. We diet and then eat cake at midnight. We hide and then reveal. The priests simply carried the paradox further, with more oil, more razors, more wigs. They made the contradiction sacred. And through it all, the Nile kept flowing, the ibis kept preening, and the priests kept shaving, only to crown themselves again with the hair they had erased. It is a ritual of absence and presence, a dance of denial and display, a puzzle that remains unsolved, yet strangely beautiful. As the false beards of kings glitter in the firelight, and as the wigs of priests sway in temple processions, you feel the story flowing forward once more. Beyond the performance, beyond the paradox, awaits the heart of it all. The ritual cycle, the endless shaving, the daily discipline that bound priestly life to the rhythm of the gods. You have walked among the priests, seen the razors gleam, watched brows vanish, witnessed wigs and false beards crown the shaven heads. Now drift deeper into the rhythm of their days. For smoothness was not a one-time act. It was a continuous cycle, a current in which every priest floated from birth to death, from dawn to dusk. The day begins long before the sun warms the sand. A hush falls over the temple, broken only by the gentle splash of water in basins. Priests rise from reed mats, feet bare, bodies glinting from oils applied the evening before. Cold water washes over them, rinsing away the dust of sleep and the last vestiges of ordinary life. Bronze razors scrape against skin, removing even the faintest hint of stubble. The scent of lotus and myrrh drifts in the air. It is a calm, almost hypnotic procession. Mainstream historians point out that temple rituals were strict and codified. Priests were responsible for feeding the statues of gods, anointing them with oils, dressing them in fine linens, and offering meals of bread, beer, and fruit. Every action demanded purity. Hairlessness was essential because the divine statues could not be touched by impurity. Every sweep of the razor, every plunge into the water was a reminder that they served something larger than themselves. But here comes the curious side note. Despite their devotion, priests were also human. They suffered from sunburn, nicks and cuts, sweat dripping beneath their wigs, and occasional boredom in endless repetition. Some even found small ways to personalize the ritual. A touch of scented oil on a wig, a patterned braid, or a quietly whispered joke to a colleague while polishing the skin of a statue. Holiness, it seems, did not erase humor entirely, and historians remain divided here. Was the endless cycle of bathing, shaving, and anointing purely a matter of piety? Or was it also about social hierarchy, the subtle assertion of power, and even the management of hygiene in a dusty, lice-prone climate? Perhaps it was all of these at once, woven together so tightly that the priests themselves could not untangle ritual from practicality. Imagine, as the sun climbs higher, the priests moving in rhythm, their bare heads glistening, arms lifting incense and oil. The temple itself seems to breathe, echoing each gesture with the soft scrape of stone, the whisper of linen, and the distant calls of birds over the river. Even the shadows seem polished, leaning along the walls, mirroring the priest's smoothness. And here is the final layer. Even death did not release them from ritual. Some priests were buried with razors, mirrors, and wigs, tools of their eternal cycle, so they could continue purification in the afterlife. Hairlessness, it seems, was not merely temporary. It was a symbol of timeless devotion. And so the story comes full circle. From the first splash of cold water at dawn, to the polishing of the statues, to the careful crowning of wigs and the ceremonial false beard. The priests lived in cycles of erasure and adornment. Each shave, each ritual, each crown of hair they replaced was part of a larger dance, a performance designed to balance the mortal and the divine. You may smile at the irony, at the humans creating hair only to remove it, at the contrast with wild foreigners, at the paradox of smooth flesh crowned with elaborate wigs. And yet, there is poetry here, a quiet devotion that runs deeper than the water in the temple basins, deeper than the incense drifting through stone halls. Imagine the temple at night. Torches gutter softly, water laps in hidden basins, and a lone priest steps back from the altar, his scalp bare, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. The world is still, but the rhythm continues. Bath, shave, anoint, dress. A cycle without end, a quiet devotion written not in words, but on polished skin. And as you slowly drift from this scene, remember that every smooth head, every erased eyebrow, every carefully placed wig was part of a centuries-long rhythm of life, devotion, and artistry. It is the world of paradox, of absence and presence, of ritual and play, all flowing gently like the Nile itself. The temple grows quiet as night settles fully across the sands. You feel the smooth stones under your hands, the soft murmur of water in hidden basins, and the distant cry of an ibis as it returns to its nest. The air carries the faint scent of lotus, mingled with cedar and myrrh, and every gentle breath you take seems to slowing the rhythm of your own pulse, as though the centuries themselves have begun to pause. You let yourself linger in the stillness. Think of the razors resting beside small bowls of water, of the bronze edges waiting for the morning, and the ritual of hair removed again and again. Each scrape of metal against skin, each plunge of body into cool water was a meditation on devotion, a quiet affirmation that life itself could be made sacred through care, through repetition, through intention. Perhaps you imagine the priests laughing quietly in the corners, sharing small human moments even while performing the sacred. Perhaps you imagine the wigs and false beards, the intricate coils and fragrant oils, and the paradox of hair removed only to be replaced. There is a gentle lesson here. Life and ritual, order and play, devotion and humor can exist in perfect balance, like reeds swaying along the Nile at dusk. Now picture the cycle extending outward, beyond the temple walls, beyond the centuries. You sense the rhythm continuing, echoing in silent chambers, in dreams, and even in your own body as you breathe. Slowly, softly, there is a calming symmetry to it, an eternal smoothness not only of skin, but of thought, of perspective, of understanding that even the most foreign customs have a quiet beauty when seen closely. And so, as you let your eyelids grow heavy, you carry the image with you. The gleaming scalp of a priest, the careful crowning of a wig, the incense swirling like slow smoke, the torchlight flickering against polished stone. A world of devotion and paradox, of ritual and artistry flows gently into the dark, and you feel yourself drifting with it. Close your eyes and let the centuries settle around you. The Nile whispers, the temple sighs, and sleep arrives softly, as endless and calm as the ritual cycles of Egyptian priests, their bodies polished, their spirits devoted, and their paradox of hairlessness and adornment flowing quietly through eternity. If you enjoyed this calm history story, please do not forget to like the video and subscribe. Sweet dreams.